Hello and welcome to this movie night review of Ody and Ed. Today I'm joined obviously by Albert and guest Ed, and so we're going to be talking about this this film slash documentary. I'll just explain quickly what it is at first. So basically what it is it's by an Australian journalist who covered the Iraq War. He was working for Time and CNN, I believe, at the time, and he was cooperating with the US forces and other Western forces, as far as I'm aware, then the insurgents as well, and other sort of local people around. So he's working with many different people at the same time. It's an incredibly graphic documentary. You know, probably more graphic by a very long distance than anything else I personally can think of. Some of the things that it shows, are as graphic as it can be. And it's a kind of interesting thing to talk about. So I'll start by putting in a couple of my opinions. So my take on it is that I think that he's a very talented communicator, cooperator. I think that to come out unscathed of Iraq, having worked with all these people, obviously not get arrested, I believe he was questioned, but to sort of really get away without much, as in, obviously psychological harm, but without, as I say, being shot or imprisoned, whilst working with all these different people, I think that's absolutely exceptional. But what my criticism is I don't think that as a sort of from a filmmaker or journalist perspective, this is actually that good a documentary. I don't think it really, I think it shows graphic things and then you're to sort of, I think you really have to make your own conclusions from it. I don't think this really tells us anything. I don't think there's that much of a moral or message behind the story, or not that there really is that much of a story. That really are just quite brutal clips, just as in they are in an order, but they're not necessarily that related. And so yeah, that's just my take. But I think at the same time, obviously, it does show how permanent. That's what I took away from it. How permanent and unchangeable some life decisions are. There's just, you only obviously live once, and there's just nothing you can do about the fact you've seen these things. You can't unsee them. They're always going to be in your life because you chose that thing. I find that fascinating. And also I think that to an extent, obviously, we have this disconnect, I would say, at the moment, where you obviously have certain politicians who may have previously been in the army, but you have people that you're obviously sending away young people mostly to war, and so I think it can be useful because it does get straight to the point of how awful war is, so maybe in that way it could be useful, but I'll see what everyone else thinks.
Yeah, well, I should firstly say that I feel I'm slightly cheating by being involved in this, and I haven't actually seen this film.
Alright, get out.
So I know, I'm being involved really, but it's an interesting topic to talk about in itself. It's probably. What did you think of the film, Ed?
I agree with Ody in the sense that it's like I have to ask why did they make it in a way? But I think once I got about halfway through, I started looking in a slightly different way because you have all these a lot of war documentaries. You probably have countless documentaries about Iraq itself, like the Iraq War. There's none quite like this. It gets probably as uncensored as you'd get without going to the source material itself, as in going there yourself or looking at beheading videos on the deep web or whatever. Whether you think there's value in that, I don't know. It certainly doesn't shy away from it. I guess you could say that. At the same time, you have to ask yourself: is it really is there really a point to it all? Is it all just gore porn? Is it all just for the sake of violence, for the sake of violence? I think the main value from this film, I guess you could say, that doesn't really come from anywhere else, is the sort of, you touched on it a bit, when he went and talked to the fundamentalists rather than just the US Army. So just seeing how they operate, without, from their perspective, seeing how they strategize and stuff was really interesting because you haven't obviously seen that kind of thing before. You haven't seen, but you can see if you wanted to, beheading videos in the hundreds of whatever. But seeing that was very interesting, if not terrifying, I suppose. Just seeing he would say casually at one point oh, they're just mortaring. This is footage that I filmed of them bombing a US base with a mortar like a few hundred feet away. It's like, it's kind of, I don't know, there's nothing really else like that out there. I would say that's the main draw to it.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of interesting. I think that you're absolutely right that there's nothing else like that, and I guess in a way it's kind of odd that it either hasn't been banned or bigger. It's odd the position it's in, that it's available obviously on Netflix. You'd think, because it really is a landmark, it is different to anything else. There's nothing, as I say, anywhere near as graphic. So you'd think that it would be the kind of thing that either everyone watches or, because it's so violent, it just gets banned. It's an odd position, because from what I've seen, it's not wildly popular. It's not something that...
I wouldn't have heard of it if you hadn't mentioned it. No.
I think it's funny how this wasn't banned and yet... the interview or whatever was, I don't know. Maybe they give more... I think they give more leeway when it's like journalism, because, obviously the moment you start to censor journalism, you get into dangerous territory. And that's primarily what it is, so that's how they get away with it, I guess. He did say a lot of the time, like, what did he say? He was riding a knife edge on his career, basically, in the sense that he could very easily get arrested for a lot of stuff he's done, basically war crimes. He could have been accidentally shot a lot of times because he was
very nearly gets executed.
Well, I mean,
with the turf war.
He
doesn't get executed.
I mean more from just like US, because he's obviously hanging around fundamentalists, so there's very good possibility that he would be associated with them and therefore, shot in combat. But
I assume he's still alive, this guy, then, is he?
Yes,
he is. He's not done.
He just lives in Australia now.
He lives in Australia. I don't think he's done another war kind of thing since.
So what would you say your for Ed mainly, I guess, what was your takeaway from this, if there was any lesson or moral or whatever, did you take anything from it?
I suppose I took the Iraq War was bad.
Yeah.
No, I think it's all well and good saying that, but this film does make it very real in the sense that, again, you can watch a lot of documentaries and there can be like 50 million people died, whatever. Like, obviously that's not true, but seeing it happen and seeing, I think the main value of it and the main takeaway for it is to see how people cope with it in just real situations, because it's just like, a lot of the time they'll just be making jokes and stuff, like the journalists and stuff, after everything they've seen. Him and his like Russian buddy, you remember?
Yeah.
They just be like making jokes, and like after, it's kind of interesting that, because it's like after everything they've seen, they're still just like, there's still some levity, and they're still just people. So I think that's the main value from it, and see the Marines talk about how they have to cope with it and like how they deal with it, and even on the other side how the fundamentalists try and justify it and how they think, and
it is interesting when you're saying about documentaries, about whether they bring anything new to the table in the debate. I know lots of people said about the documentary Al Gore made about climate change. What a lot of people criticised it was because they said it doesn't tell you anything new. In that everybody already knows kind of climate change is a bad thing, and so the only people who will see the film are people who already know that.
Want to reaffirm it.
So I feel like potentially if this hasn't been that well seen by that many people, the people who are going to see it are people who already know the Iraq War was kind of horrible.
That's what I mean though. It's like they might know it's bad, but this relates to what he said. This one, they might know it's bad, but they wouldn't maybe realize how bad and see it on
actually seeing the stuff
personal level.
No, this is sort of a question I have. You mentioned that the type of people that watch it. I sort of wonder, because obviously even if you haven't watched it, you get the picture that it's sort of especially graphic. What I wonder is, do either of you think this is something that should be seen by the masses? Like, do you think, because we think we have an understanding of war, but really we think about it a lot, but we never really think about it as graphically and as real as it is and as this is. And as I talked about, the politician thing of the disconnect they have, do you think that everyone seeing this and seeing how in such a real way, do you think that would actually be beneficial?
Well, I think you need to walk a fine line because, like, you don't want to scare people away from seeing things. Like, you know, if you introduce some documentary with the proviso this contains distressing images, some people are going to turn off with that and just don't want to see it at all, and then they don't get to see any of it. You know, it's the same with like charity appeals and stuff when they show like, you know, children starving and stuff like that. You know, at the same time as you want to highlight it and draw attention to it, you don't want people just going, oh no, I don't want to see that.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want to just turn it off and not bothering.
I think
you do need to walk a fine line.
I think if you're thinking about going to war, you should probably watch it.
Yeah.
Know what you're getting yourself into. Because it's all well and good saying you understand the risks, but seeing what might happen and seeing what you might become as well. Because it's probably worth mentioning. I don't know if we talked about it yet. Like he doesn't exactly glorify the U.S. military. In one of the last scenes, I'm not gonna spoil it, but it shows how the effects. I'm not gonna say that they are horrible people because. But moreover, it shows the effects of what war can do to you and what living on the razor's edge for so long can do to your psyche, and more importantly, just like your compassion. So, if you think that you're going to go to war, or if perhaps you think that your husband, who has 70k confirmed kills, is a hero, maybe you should probably watch it. I'm not saying you're necessarily wrong, but maybe you should assess all the information before you make that kind of judgment.
It's not Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I kind of question, you know, thinking, going back to the main idea, like, is maybe the main takeaway from this, you know, less of a war thing, but really a people thing, you know, as to how people change, how people can't, you know, change their decisions and can't change who they are.
Like I said, it's you could watch a documentary about how the Iraq War started. I mean, for Christ's sake, this documentary isn't even about like Bin Laden. It's about Sakhawi, which obviously was a big figure, but it's not about how it starts. It's not about
very little politics.
Very little politics involved. But if
George W. Bush, nothing else.
Really. It's mainly about him talking about just his kind of reactions and stuff, isn't it? So if you wanted to know how the Iraq War started and stuff, and like the kind of politics behind it, probably watch another documentary or read up on it. This is more about people who kind of, I guess, know about it, or at least were alive to remember it, and then just maybe that would be interesting for them.
Perhaps that links to bringing something new to the debate, almost like talking about the actual what happened there, rather than the sort of
the grand,
big
like,
scale,
impersonal
you know,
politics.
Exactly. Yes. How did it start?
There is definitely value in that.
Yeah.
I think one bit of praise, sort of linking to that I would give is I think he is very good in terms of how he has a very appropriate position himself in it, in that it's not all about him, but he does, you know, he's not just an observer. He lets you in on it, and he sort of touches to an appropriate extent that he's part of this as well. He's changed himself, because obviously he mentions how he's ashamed of himself for not doing anything in the scene that you mentioned. So yeah, I think he really does give a wide... I mean, it couldn't be a wider view of war, really, in a single documentary. It does look... I mean, it looks at the civilians killed, it looks at all different sides of the war.
It's quite interesting that he's Australian, you said, in that it's just a slightly different perspective to the usual kind of, like, slightly American-centric view you get a lot of times.
Even Russian as well. So
with a Russian,
Even the ones documentaries who don't glorify the U.S. military, I feel like, even just because they're from America, it makes it a bit... It's just interesting here seeing from somebody else.
Can I just say, the only one thing I would slightly disagree with you on this is that I do think there's still a tiny bit of like Western bias, and the main bit that I would talk about is when we see it's at the start, and one of the first things that happens, and it essentially leads to a lot of the violence that goes on and the hatred, is when obviously an American soldier shoots someone in the car. I believe it's a young boy, and he says, "Oh, a nervous US soldier shoots him." Yeah. That is, I think...
Well, it's not lying.
Well, I mean, he murders an innocent civilian who's unarmed. I think, you know, in that extent, you know, as in I mean, whether rightly or not rightly, but, you know, there's a lack of consistency, as in every single thing we see of the insurgents, he says he's there and it's evil. And he does also say that about the US, but I think sort of at that moment it is quite I just don't necessarily think you'd say the same.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean, but at the same time, I think he's not really saying that he was right. I think he's more the whole point of the documentary. I guess if this was a standard narrative thing, you'd say the theme of it. It's kind of like what war does to you, and it's like I think that's what he means. Is like he wasn't saying a heroic U.S. military man. He said a nervous one, like somebody who is on edge because he's been at war. So. It's not the same. I don't think as glorifying it.
Actually,
also, it's just as a side note as well. It's like you have to be I don't know if it's like weird to say, but there is a slight bias in all of us just because we're from a Western civilization. We don't like cutting people's heads off. I'm sorry.
No,
but
I don't live in Iraq. So
I'm going to take a slight moral high ground in the sense that you can't really be completely equal because we don't. Yes, we're not perfect, but we don't cut people's heads off. So.
I think one thing it also shows as well, like one of the benefits of how real it shows war to be, is it also shows how worryingly sort of easy to an extent it can be for certain people, or how simple it can be to end another human's life.
Because we see so much violence on like movies and films and stuff.
Yeah.
Movies is a thing, but
like
seeing actual real violence.
Yeah, this is the thing.
Different.
All it takes is the pull of a trigger, a twitch in your finger. All it takes is, we see people putting mortars. I mean, anyone can put a object down a tube, can't they? Like, and it's, that's the thing. I think he makes it very, I think that bit especially, because he emphasises the scene where he's with insurgents who are throwing mortars. He sort of says how important this is, but obviously, if you were looking, I think, at another thing, it doesn't maybe click as much because you don't see the explosions in that bit. You don't see the death, and it sort of links those two very well. How he can see how upsetting it is to see people doing that simple thing, when really we often don't see that link between the sort of death and just a simple thing like pulling a trigger. It's really sad, I think, for the sake of life, that it can be ended so easily.
Yeah, just as a side note, if you think your kid who plays Call of Duty is desensitized to violence, make him watch this, and then I think you'll see that that's not true. Because there is a pretty real difference between this is like real violence, and this is pretty. And I wanted to talk about that. I don't know if we kind of touched on it a bit, but like, this isn't an American documentary. I guess it is American. The guy's Australian, but it is pretty much American.
He's working
for America.
Yeah, so there is, I have to say, a lot of Americanization to it. Not in the sense that, as I said, I don't think they glorify the US military a whole lot, but in the way it's edited and the way it's kind of structured in the narration, like the dramatic music. There's a lot of moments where I just thought it's just a bit overdone. I don't know if you'll agree with me on that. Just kind of like, it mainly does seem to want to shock you more than anything, so it does a lot of tricks to help along with that, and it does show a lot of raw footage, which I appreciate, and it's not a lot of editing. I just wondered if you thought that was worth talking about, because if it's appropriate or not. I would say no.
Yeah, I think maybe when you think of how raw the content is, maybe the effects make the overall thing, the overall documentary slightly less raw, you could say.
That's what I mean. It's like, I feel like if you're going for this approach of showing war in its full light without any censors, that's fine. But you end up going in the opposite direction, where it's like you're trying to extrapolate it and make it even more dramatic. Because again, like, you gotta remember, it's pretty horrible and everything, and it was horrible. But there are people, and like there was times when they would just be laughing and like making jokes and stuff when they were in like the middle of a war zone.
Yeah. The thing is, it's worth pointing out that is a natural human reaction. I think we should bear that in mind. That
that's what I mean.
To laugh. I think that is natural.
I'm not saying that's. I'm saying that's what it like. That shows how human they are.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but they liked to kind of make it seem like it was a movie, like it was a fictional thing, like. Anyway, that was the kind of vibe I got from anyway.
Okay, so to sort of round off, shall we all have...
The question I was just going to ask you to round it off really is, sort of, I was going to say, for someone who hasn't seen it, would you say, is it a film worth watching?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
So can we just say, like, a very quick, opinionated summary, and who do you think should watch it?
Who do you think should watch it? Again, I think the main value of it is the personal side of things, showing it in its realistic kind of glory. If you know about the Iraq War inside and out, in terms of statistics and the way it happened, like say a history student, it's probably worth watching just to kind of remind yourself that these are real people. Again, I've talked about what kind of people should watch it. I think most people should watch it. Even if you're a bit put off by the violence, I mean, whatever, suck it up. Like, that's part of it. It's gonna make you uncomfortable, but that's the reason why you should watch these things. It's because you should remind yourself that not everyone's as comfortable as you are. So, I don't know. I don't think that's a good excuse if you're just afraid of the violence, or something like that. Then I don't think that's good enough. I think you should watch it. You fucking pussy. Anyway.
Okay, so I would say I would sort of agree. So I think I agree in that it's definitely the people thing that's most important, and as I mentioned at the start, the sort of how irreversible the decisions are and how things change. It does really develop as well. I would say I slightly disagree. I don't think there's any shame with being afraid of it. Like, it is incredibly graphic.
Yeah, I do agree with you there. Actually,
I think
completely. I don't want to
I was joking, obviously.
Yes.
But
Yeah, my take is that with it,
you can just be aware of the violence without
Yeah.
necessarily see it. Yes.
I think preferably it's something I would encourage, because it is. I do think it helps in terms of awareness, no matter how, I guess unpleasant or not unpleasant, but as in how disturbing it is, and how, from a personal perspective, it's obviously not an enjoyable thing. But I think it is important, and especially if you're the one making the decisions, who obviously, maybe the position they're in, they probably would be able to watch it. I think it definitely would be worth them watching to understand the true impact and sort of avoiding this whole million death statistic kind of idea.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So yeah, that's my view. I think that a lot of people should watch it. As I said at the start, I don't think it's a masterpiece in some ways. I don't think it's clever, but I think there are a lot of interpretations you can get away from it. And yeah, like we've done, like sort of thinking about it and discussing it as the best approach.
Yes. Obviously, I haven't seen it. I don't really have that much to add to that, but it does sound like an interesting sort of something a bit different about the Iraq
Will you
War,
watch
which
it,
is
that's a good question.
I will attempt to. Yes, my Netflix watch list is very long, but I also have a long summer, so I will try and watch it.
It's only an hour and a quarter, so it's actually pretty short.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much for visiting my channel and listening to this today.
Fuck off.
See you next time.